Ngũgĩ Thiong'o, born on the 5th of January 1938, was a Kenyan author and academic, who was described as East Africa's leading novelist and an important figure in modern African literature. Ngũgĩ began writing in English before later switching to write primarily in Gikuyu, becoming a strong advocate for literature written in native African languages. His works include the celebrated novel The River Between, plays, short stories, and essays, ranging from literary and social criticism to children's literature. He was the founder and editor of the Giku language journal Mutiri. His short story, The Upright Revolution, or Why Humans Walk Upright, was translated into more than 100 languages. In 1977, Ngũgĩ embarked upon a novel form of theater in Kenya that sought to liberate the theatrical process from what he held to be the general bourgeois education system, by encouraging spontaneity and audience participation in the performances. His project sought to demystify the theatrical process and to avoid the process of alienation that produces a gallery of active stars and an undifferentiated mass of grateful admirers, which, according to Ngũgĩ, encourages passivity in ordinary people. Although his landmark play, Ngahika Ndinda Koriton with Ngũgĩ wa Miri, was a commercial success, it was shut down by the authoritarian Kenyan regime 6 weeks after its opening. Ngũgĩ was subsequently imprisoned for more than a year. Adopted as an Amnesty International prisoner of conscience, he was released from prison and fled Kenya. He was appointed Distinguished Professor of Comparative Literature and English at the University of California, Irvine. He had previously taught at Northwestern University, Yale University, and New York University. Ngũgĩ was frequently regarded as a likely candidate for the Nobel Prize in Literature. He won the 2001 International Nannino Prize in Italy and the 2016 Park Q&A Prize. Among his children are authors Mukama wa Ngũgĩ and Wanjek wa Ngũgĩ. Ngũgĩ was born in Kamirthu, near Limuru, in Kiwambu District, Kenya, of Kikuyu descent, and baptized James Ngũgĩ. His father had 4 wives and 28 children. Ngũgĩ was born to his third wife, Wanjiku. His family was caught up in the Momo uprising. His half-brother Mwangi was actively involved in the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, in which he was killed. Another brother was shot during the state of emergency, and his mother was tortured at Kamirthu Home Guard Post. Ngũgĩ went to the Alliance High School and went on to study at Makerere University College in Kampala, Uganda. As a student, he attended the African Writers' Conference, held at Makerere in June 1962. And his play The Black Hermit premiered as part of the event at the National Theatre. At the conference, Ngũgĩ asked Chinua Achebe to read the manuscripts of his novels The River Between and Weep Not, Child, which were subsequently published in Heineman's African Writers series, launched in London that year, with Achebe as its first advisory editor. Ngũgĩ received his BA in English from Makerere University College, Uganda. In 1963, First Publications and Studies in England, editing Ngũgĩ's debut novel, Weep Not, Child, was published in May 1964. It was the first novel in English to be published by a writer from East Africa later that year, having won a scholarship to the University of Leeds to study for an MA. Ngũgĩ traveled to England, where he was when his second novel, The River Between, came out in 1965. The River Between, which has the Momo uprising as its background and describes an unhappy romance between Christians and non-Christians, was previously on Kenya's national secondary school syllabus. He left Leeds without completing his thesis on Caribbean literature, for which his studies had focused on George Lamming, about whom Ngũgĩ said in his 1972 collection of essays Homecoming, he evoked for me an unforgettable picture of a peasant revolt in a white-dominated world. And suddenly I knew that a novel could be made to speak to me, could, with a compelling urgency, touch chords deep down in me. His world was not as strange to me as that of Fielding, Defoe, Smollett, Jane Austen, George Eliot, Dickens, D.H. Lawrence. Ngũgĩ's 1967 novel A Grain of Wheat marked his embrace of Fananist Marxism. He subsequently renounced writing in English and the name James Ngũgĩ as colonialist. By 1970, he had changed his name to Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o and began to write in his native Gikuyu. In 1967, Ngũgĩ also began teaching at the University of Nairobi as a professor of English literature. He continued to teach at the university for 10 years while serving as a fellow in creative writing at Makerere University. During this time, he also guest lectured at Northwestern University in the Department of English and African Studies for a year. While a professor at the University of Nairobi, Ngũgĩ was the catalyst of the discussion to abolish the English department. He argued that after the end of colonialism, it was imperative that a university in Africa teach African literature, including oral literature, and that such should be done with the realization of the richness of African languages. In the late 1960s, these efforts resulted in the university dropping English literature as a course of study and replacing it with one that positioned African literature, oral and written, at the center. In 1976. Thiong'o helped to establish the Kamirithu Community Education and Cultural Center, which, among other things, organized African theater in the area. The following year saw the publication of Petals of Blood, its strong political message, and that of his play, Ngahika Ndenda, I Will Marry When I Want, Koritin with Ngũgĩ wa Miri, and also published in 1977, provoked the then Kenyan Vice President Daniel Arap Moi to order his arrest. Along with copies of his play, books by Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, and Vladimir Lenin were confiscated. He was sent to Kamiti Maximum Security Prison and kept there without a trial for nearly a year. Ngũgĩ was imprisoned in a cell with other political prisoners. During part of their imprisonment, they were allowed 1 hour of sunlight a day. Ngũgĩ writes, the compound used to be for the mentally deranged convicts before it was put to better use as a cage for the politically deranged. He found solace in writing and wrote the first modern novel in Gikuyu, Devil on the Cross, Kataani Mothermin, on prison-issued toilet paper, after Ngũgĩ's release in December 1978. He was not reinstated to his job as professor at Nairobi University, and his family was harassed. Because he wrote about the injustices of the dictatorial government at the time, Ngũgĩ and his family were forced to live in exile. Only after Arap Moi, the longest-serving Kenyan president, retired in 2002, was it safe for them to return. During his time in prison, Ngũgĩ decided to cease writing his plays and other works in English and began writing all his creative works in his native tongue. Gikuyu.ng. Gigi's time in prison also inspired the play The Trial of Dedan Kimathi, 1976. Written in collaboration with Misheri Githai Mugo, The Trial of Dedan Kimathi was performed at Festac 77 in Lagos, Nigeria. While in exile, Ngũgĩ worked with a London-based committee for the release of political prisoners. In Kenya, 1982–98. Madigari Manjarunji, translated by Wangui wa Goro into English as Madigari, was published at this time. In 1984, he was visiting professor at Beirut University, and the following year was writer-in-residence for the Borough of Islington in London. He also studied film at Dramatiska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden, 1986. Ngũgĩ's later works include Detained, his prison diary, 1981. Decolonizing the Mind, The Politics of Language in African Literature, 1986. An essay arguing for African writers' expression in their native languages rather than European languages, in order to renounce lingering colonial ties and to build authentic African literature, and Madigari, translated by Wangui wa Goro. 1987, one of his most famous works. A satire based on a Gikuyu folktale. Ngũgĩ was visiting professor of English and Comparative Literature at Yale University between 1989 and 1992. In 1992, he was a guest at the Congress of South African Writers and spent time in ZY Township. With Mzee Mahola, the year he became a professor of comparative literature and performance studies at New York University, where he held the Eric Maria Remarque Chair. He served as distinguished professor of English and comparative literature and was first director of the International Center for Writing and Translation at the University of California, Irvine. On the 8th of August 2004, Ngũgĩ returned to Kenya as part of a month-long tour of East Africa. On the 11th of August, robbers broke into his high-security apartment. They assaulted Ngũgĩ, sexually assaulted his wife, and stole various items of value. When Ngũgĩ returned to the U.S. at the end of his month-long trip, 5 men were arrested on suspicion of the crime, including one of his nephews. In 2006, the American publishing firm Random House published his first new novel in nearly 2 decades, Wizard of the Crow. Translated to English from Gikuyu by the author. On the 10th of November 2006. While in San Francisco at Hotel Vitale, at the Ngũgĩ was harassed and ordered to leave the hotel by an employee. The event led to a public outcry and angered both African Americans and members of the African diaspora living in America, which led to an apology by the Hotel. Ngũgĩ. Later books include Globalectics, Theory, and the Politics of Knowing. 2012, and Something Torn and New, An African Renaissance. A collection of essays published in 2009 making the argument for the crucial role of African languages in the resurrection of African memory, about which Publishers Weekly said, Ngũgĩ's language is fresh, the questions he raises are profound, the argument he makes is clear. To starve or kill a language is to starve and kill a people's memory bank. This was followed by 2 well-received autobiographical works, Dreams in a Time of War, A Childhood, Memoir 2010, and In the House of the Interpreter, a memoir 2012, which was described as brilliant and essential by the Los Angeles Times. Among other positive reviews, there was perennial speculation about Ngũgĩ being a likely candidate to win the Nobel Prize in Literature, and he had been considered a firm favorite in 2010. However, that year it was awarded to Peruvian writer Mario Vargas Llosa. And afterwards, Ngũgĩ was reported as saying that he was less disappointed than the photographers who had gathered outside his home. I was the one who was consoling them. Ngũgĩ's book, The Perfect Nine, originally written and published in Gikuyu as Kenda Muyeru, Rugano Ra Gikuyu, Na Mumbi, 2019, was translated into English by Ngũgĩ for its 2020 publication, and is a reimagining in epic poetry of his people's origin story. It was described by the Los Angeles Times as a quest novel in verse that explores folklore, myth, and allegory through a decidedly feminist and Pan-African lens. The review in World Literature Today said, Ngũgĩ crafts a beautiful retelling of the Gikuyu myth that emphasizes the noble pursuit of beauty, the necessity of personal courage, the importance of filial piety, and a sense of the giver supreme, a being who represents divinity and unity across world religions. All these things coalesce into dynamic verse to make The Perfect Nine a story of miracles and perseverance, a chronicle of modernity and myth, a meditation on beginnings and endings, and a palimpsest of ancient and contemporary memory, as Ngũgĩ overlays the Perfect Nine's feminine power onto the origin myth of the Gikuyu people of Kenya in a moving rendition of the epic form. Fiona Sampson, writing in The Guardian, concluded that it is a beautiful work of integration that not only refuses distinctions between high art and traditional storytelling, but supplies that all too rare human necessity, the sense that life has meaning. In March 2021, The Perfect Nine became the first work written in an indigenous African language to be longlisted for the International Booker Prize. with Ngũgĩ becoming the first nominee as both the author and translator of the book. When asked in 2023 whether Kenyan English or Nigerian English were now local languages, Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o responded, "It's like the enslaved being happy that theirs is a local version of enslavement. English is not an African language. French is not. Spanish is not. Kenyan or Nigerian English is nonsense. That's an example of normalized abnormality. The colonized trying to claim the colonizer's language is a sign of the success of enslavement." For of his children are also published authors Thiong'o, Mukoma wa Ngũgĩ, Nduki wa Ngũgĩ, and Wanjik wa Ngũgĩ. In March 2024, Mukoma posted on Twitter that his father had physically abused his mother. Now deceased. Health and Death, 1995. Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o was diagnosed with prostate cancer and told he had 3 months to live. Nevertheless, he recovered. In 2019, he had triple bypass heart surgery, and around this time began to struggle with kidney failure. He died in Beaufort, Georgia, United States, on the 28th of May, 2025. At the age of 87. At the time of his death, Ngũgĩ was reportedly receiving kidney dialysis treatments, but his immediate cause of death is still unknown. After Ngũgĩ's death, Western news outlets highlighted his efforts to fight colonialism and other social critiques. Awards and honors. Gen.G. MGE has received numerous awards and honorary degrees for his contributions to literature, education, and human rights, including Nanino International Prize for Literature 2001. Nobel Prize nominations frequently considered a contender, the Nicholas Gillan Lifetime Achievement Award, PN Awards, and other literary honor, and many others. Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o is widely regarded as one of the most important African writers and intellectuals of the 20th and 21st centuries. His insistence on writing in Gikuyu, his fearless political engagement, and his commitment to linguistic and cultural liberation have made him a revolutionary figure in both literary and political spheres. His work continues to inspire writers, scholars, and activists around the world. May he rest in eternal peace.